Welcome to False Flag Weekly News, fighting the good fight on behalf of conspiracy theorists everywhere for, well, the better part of a decade, I think. This show has been around in one form or another for a decade, I think, since Alan Rees first came up with the idea of a weekly news roundup. So we're happy to be here. And hey, Helen Byniski, thank you for coming back on the show.
Good to be here.
So is the revolution here? Something's happening here. What it is ain't exactly clear, but people have been locked down in coronavirus dystopia for several months, and suddenly riots and revolution it's breaking out everywhere across like 15, 20 American cities. Even as we speak, big demonstration in Minneapolis is happening this very afternoon. We are going to be covering this. Helen witnessed the festivities in New York City yesterday, so we'll talk about that. But of course, this revolution is obviously closely related to the corona dystopia. People have been locked down too long. It's not just about the I can't breathe, cops throttling everybody, especially if they're black, but it's about the authorities throttling everybody, wrapping masks around our faces and locking us up in our homes and threatening to totally surveil us and turn us into human stock. So we'll be getting to the ongoing revolution in a bit, but first some very important announcements. We cannot please everybody. So if you're one of the people who is grossly displeased by these red pill issues we explore on this show, asking the hard questions, you better change the channel and you can watch the revolution on the mainstream media. But if you're interested in the other side of the story, check out False Flag Weekly News every week right here on noliesradio.org. And if you want to make sure you know exactly where we're broadcasting and how to find us, do send an email to Alan by way of ffwn@noliesradio.org, and we'll keep you apprised so that you can watch us, even if we get banned, shadow banned, deplatformed, suppressed, anything short of locked up in the basement of Walmart. We will be broadcasting, and maybe we'll even broadcast from there if necessary. So please do get on our list. All right, so the interactive symposium tomorrow, we do have to first tell you before we get into today's news that tomorrow we're going to be showing that video from Professor Francis Boyle, who wrote the Biowar Treaty. We're going to bring on Ron Unz, publisher of Unz Review, a leading alternative webzine. I'll be participating. Barry Kissin, the biowar expert from right next door to Fort Detrick, who's done great work on the 2001 anthrax false flag. Merrill Nass, another biological warfare expert, and Thomas Wilcutt, a science-based attorney. All of us will be talking about the corona biowar hypothesis. That is, this was unleashed deliberately and made in a lab. At least that's what I think. Barry doesn't think so, but we'll be exploring that idea. And if you're afraid of dangerous ideas, you better not go there. But if you're interested, and I think this is the $1 million question, I think you probably don't want to miss this. All right, so let's get into the stories. Helen, we're winning. The conspiracy theorists are taking over the discourse. 3/5 of Brits don't believe their government on coronavirus. You've been publishing great stuff, and we'll get into some of that. But the good news is 60% don't believe the government. The bad news is 4 in 10 think that this is Chinese war on Western civilization. So is this good news or bad news?
Well, I mean, at least they are not trusting the original fake story from the mainstream media. They're only trusting the second level of fake story from the mainstream media. So it's progress. I mean, baby steps. It's difficult to get people to jump all the way into like the truth pool without hitting their heads on the shallow bottom of the part they choose to jump into. So yeah, I mean, if they're questioning what they're reading in the establishment media, that's a good thing. But I also have a feeling that they probably didn't ask them this question in such a way that would have allowed them to answer, well, yes, I think it came out of a lab and it was a US lab. They probably just said, did it come out of a lab? And then they marked it off as, yes, Chinese, because they didn't give them another option. That and people, there's always the effect of like, the way they answer the question is designed to appease the questioner. They give the questioner what they think they want to hear. So nobody wants to be thought of as a conspiracy theorist because there's been all these articles coming out about how conspiracy theorists are prone to narcissism and low self-esteem. I'm sure next week it'll be conspiracy theorists are prone to raping puppies and keeping dead children in their meat freezers. That will be next week. But for now, it's narcissism and low self-esteem. So nobody wants to be associated with that.
But I bet if the pollsters asked the question in a way tailored to get a positive response, like something like, could David Icke possibly be right that elite forces have rigged this corona epidemic in order to affect the biggest wealth transfer in human history, or something like that? That sounds fairly reasonable and highly probable. Who knows what they would get? I don't think they want to even find out.
Yeah, that's why they ask it in such a way that invites giving a certain kind of answer and sort of rules out other kinds of answers.
Indeed. And there's a history of this with polls about 9/11 truth. There were some that actually were fairly honest about the way they asked the question. And they got like 36% of the people saying it's likely that 9/11 was a false flag designed to launch a war in the Middle East. And there was another one that showed about 89% didn't believe the official version of 9/11 at some level. But then there are others that are tailored to try to minimize the 9/11 truth movement. So you can look over the history of these polls and figure out, who's asking the questions and whether they're being fair or not. Well, how about the red-pilled community growing by leaps and bounds in really interesting directions? Our next story, the latest member is Elon Musk and his follower on Twitter, Ivanka Trump. That's right. They're both red-pilled, and they're probably watching even as we speak. So, hey, a shout out to Elon and Ivanka. Welcome to False Flag Weekly News.
I'd be very surprised if either of them is quote unquote red-pilled in the sense that would involve them watching a show like this. But, Elon Musk has gotten manipulating his company's stock prices down to such an exact science. I mean, I have to admire the guy. He knows what he's doing. And as far as billionaires go, he's the least defensive of the bunch. But I mean, the fact that people keep falling for it and that they feel like there's nothing that they can do to, wasn't he supposed to clear his tweets with some sort of SEC official before making them, or did that just kind of fall by the wayside? I mean, Ivanka is just doing it because she's, I actually have no idea why Ivanka's doing it, so I take that back. But Elon Musk, I think he's supposed to be clearing his tweets with a stock official.
Yeah. Well, the thing about this story in the New York Times is they're trying to spin this as if being red-pilled means that you're a racist, a misogynist, a Trump-supporting right-winger. That's what it says. It says the truth to be woken up to varies, but it ends up being about gender. To be red-pilled, you discovered that feminism was a scam and that you embraced racism and misogyny. Somehow I didn't get that memo until the New York Times told me.
Well, it's like the conspiracy thing. They associate these words that have nothing to do with these terrible characteristics, and they say, "Oh, well, if you're this, then you must be this." And so all of a sudden, the people who might have tiptoed towards the red pill concept are like, "Oh, I don't really want to be associated with that," and that's the whole point.
But the one fairly honest sentence in this whole story was that being red-pilled has become a common phrase in Silicon Valley, quote, to signal contrarian thinking. And it's narrative violation, which is used to describe an event that cuts against the mainstream media's consensus on a topic. Well, that's pretty good. I mean, that's like academic speak, and it says it pretty straight. So at least they wrote one honest sentence in this New York Times polemic against red pills. And but the thrust of the article was to try to smear Elon Musk and tell him that nobody's ever going to buy a Tesla again because now you're hanging around with conspiracy theorists. Well, maybe the New York Times is never going to sell a subscription again pretty soon, the way things are going. So speaking of the war on the fake news media, how about Donald Trump? Normally, I don't have much use for Trump, but a little spat broke out this week that had me cheering for him. Here's Trump getting fact-checked on Twitter, and he doesn't like it. So in the next slide, which looks exactly the same, is Trump threatens to crack down on social media platforms. Both of these are CNN stories. And that's not exactly, it's not exactly a crackdown he's threatening. In the next slide, and let's move through these slides kind of quickly. The Reuters story is Trump orders a review of the law protecting social media companies from libel suits and so on. And finally, we'll move on to my take on this, published at Veterans Today yesterday, that in fact, Trump is absolutely right on this. It's one of the few really good things I've ever seen Donald Trump do, threatening the social media companies and the internet companies in general, saying that if you're not going to have a content neutral internet platform, then you don't get the protection from lawsuits that was promised on the basis of your promising to be content neutral. I mean, this is a no-brainer. And I guess only a brainless guy like Trump could figure it out. It's like, it's so simple that a 4-year-old could see it. So bring me a 4-year-old because I can't make heads or tails of it. So Helen, what is Trump actually a free speech hero now?
Well, it's funny that he waited until it was finally affecting just him personally. But I mean, yeah, it's pretty obvious that if you're trying to claim Section 230 protection, yet you're trying to act as a publisher and censor things selectively by applying the rules to the people that you don't like, but not applying the rules to the people that you do like, then you are not eligible for Section 230 protection. So they've been having it both ways for so many years, because the thing is, they give the government a chance to sort of skirt around that pesky First Amendment. You know, the government can't step in and censor people because that would be illegal. So it has to be the private company that steps in and censors people. And because they have this sort of tit for tat, quid pro quo, as Trump might say, and probably should, because that would really stick the knife in. But yeah, it's they each get something out of it, and Trump is now left a little turd in the punch bowl in the form of this executive order. And I like this feud. I want to see it continue, because, you know, they've gotten away with a lot, and they've pushed everybody onto these platforms and then pulled the rug out from under them by preventing them from actually talking about the subjects that they came onto the platforms to talk about in the first place. It's like, unless you just want to share cat videos all day, which, I mean, there's something to be said for a good cat video, but if that's the limit of your interactions, then that's a pretty pathetic life you've got there. So yeah, go Trump on this one.
Indeed. You know, I bet some of our viewers aren't even old enough to remember the internet before this wave of censorship got going in a small way, maybe around 2010-ish. And then it peaked and became just massive in like 2016, and it's getting worse all the time ever since then. Before this wave of censorship, you put up a good 9/11 truth video or on, you know, any kind of alternative take on things, you put it on YouTube, you might get 1 million views or more. You might get 100 million like Loose Change did. Today, that's impossible because they are censoring us. And that is completely wrong based on the whole premise of the internet. The basis of the internet originally was that it's going to be content neutral. It's like a telephone system, just like the phone company lets you say anything you want on the phone. And if you break a law, it's law enforcement's business. The phone company isn't going to censor you. The same is true for the whole entire internet. That is the entire basis of the internet revolution. And suddenly they started violating that, which is also a violation of the First Amendment of the Constitution. Actually, it wasn't so much suddenly, it was sneaky. They first started jamming videos like RT's 9/11 and Operation Gladio video, a Truth Seeker episode with Daniel Bushell that I appeared in nearly 10 years ago, I think. And that was heading for superstar status, many millions, if not hundreds of millions of views. And the NSA or somebody with similar capabilities stepped in, jammed it, made it disappear from all search engines, including the YouTube search engine, somehow effected a ban on emails containing that link. If you send an email containing that link, your email just disappeared. It didn't bounce, it didn't arrive, it just disappeared. So the NSA apparently did that 10 years ago in a special case. And now they've basically forced the whole internet is constantly shadow banning and censoring everything that the powers that be don't like. It's utterly Orwellian and utterly illegal and unconstitutional. And frankly, I'm ready to go and join the revolution and do the stuff that they're doing in these big cities, fighting the man about this issue. So, maybe if all of us get together and react against this unjust power structure that's locked us down, that's lied to us, that's attacking us with biological warfare. It's enacting the biggest heist in human history, and it's crushing our constitutional rights, and it's enabling evil cops to murder people with impunity. We do need a revolution, and it needs to be a lot bigger than what's going on right now all over the country, and I hope it gets bigger. If I were younger, I'd be up there fighting the cops in Minneapolis this very afternoon. But it's going to have to get a little bigger before I haul my 61-year-old body out there and put it in front of the cops and start fighting them physically. But frankly, it's time for that, because in Islam we say that if they expel you from your homes, you fight them, militarily. And they've expelled us from home. This isn't the country I thought I was living in. This isn't the country it used to be. They've taken it away. They've expelled me from my home. I'm living in an occupied gulag state right now, and I am obligated to fight them militarily. How do you feel about that, Helen?
Well, it's definitely not the country that I grew up in, and I mean, I'm younger than you, but I don't recognize I mean, things like privacy, like kids growing up now, I've said this before, but kids growing up now have never experienced privacy. Things like freedom of speech, as you said, the internet used to be where sort of this like paradise of just, you could go out and you could find anything. Now you go into a search engine and you type something in and you get nothing. You are put down a very specific tunnel that has no even edges to grab onto. They just put you right where they want you and you can't find anything. YouTube, try searching anything on YouTube. You end up with a bunch of CNN links, and nobody goes on YouTube to look at CNN. So they've broken their own products. They've, and in real life, they've done the same thing. They've broken their own society. I mean, you're supposed to you pay taxes because you're supposed to get like services, things taken care of. A functional healthcare system like the rest of the world has would be nice, but no, we have to send our $38 billion over the next 10 years to Israel to fund their functional healthcare system. So it's really, we've been ripped off in a huge way. And the time for words and talk is unfortunately past, which is too bad, because I think most people would rather just, talk things out. But when it reaches a point like this, where you're literally, your back is against the wall and the wolves are at the door and a whole bunch of other metaphors, you got to just go outside with your pitchfork and get involved. There's no choice.
Yeah. Amen. So let's be fair, though. Let's try to be fair and balanced and look at both sides of this story. My Veterans Today editors totally disagree with me on a lot of this stuff, coming out of a different point of view from mine, for sure.
The Veterans Today editors are really wrong about a lot of things. I don't know why, what their angle is or who's paying them, but they're way off base on a few things, but that. So
I disagree with them quite strongly on a number of issues, and I have a totally different philosophical framework too. And I do appreciate that they give me total free speech on that platform that they built, and so that's why I stay there. So the one point that they do have here, which doesn't invalidate all of my points, in my opinion, is that the offending tweet that Trump set out, saying that they're going to steal the election from me because there's going to be vote fraud in California because all of these undocumented immigrants are going to run around with little, Xerox copies of paper ballot requests and vote more than once. That was completely freaking insane. I mean, Trump, he couldn't win California if he sent the military in there to prevent everybody from voting. There's no way he could win California. He's going to lose California like 80-20 or something. And so that whole tweet was just utterly, and there is not that whole problem he's suggesting of fake of Latinos voting 3 times. It's insane. So his tweet was insane.
Not really. I mean, there's voter fraud all over the place, especially in California. I know he probably wouldn't win California, and it's not Latinos specifically who are responsible for voting fraud, but there's a lot of voting fraud that goes on in this country, and mail voting would make it a lot easier. So that's what I don't understand, is that it wasn't really a hugely false tweet unless you examine it from that point of view that he's specifically talking about he would win in California if not for this. But as far as voter fraud, I mean,
what's the evidence? What's the evidence for that, Helen? There's excellent
Debbie Wasserman Schultz. There's boxes of ballots that were not counted in that Florida race. There's all of these people have shown images of their some like dead relative or something with 80 mail-in ballots with her name on it. That was a pretty famous one that was around last week. And there's more than one of these though. Like they request mail-in ballots and they get a sheaf of like 80 of them. And like for dead people. So it's not, I mean, they know how to do voter fraud. It's kind of their thing. And
well, I haven't looked into it for a couple of years, but back when I was researching this, there was basically no evidence for any meaningful fraud by ordinary people, but there was great evidence for organized fraud by entire political syndicates and crime organizations. But they mostly do it by tweaking the election machines. But what Trump is suggesting is that your illegal alien neighbor who shouldn't be voting at all is actually going to vote twice, and that's insane.
Yeah, no, it's not something that your neighbor would do of their own accord, like just suddenly get it into their head to commit voter fraud. No, it would be the organized crime syndicate that would recruit your neighbor, your other neighbor, a whole bunch of other people to go and vote fraudulently in whatever way. I don't know the exact details because I've never run one of these operations, but I know that it is done because you see these things.
No, they don't need to do that, Helen. They just tweak their computers. They own the black box software. They would never bother to do what you're suggesting.
Well, isn't that the point of paper ballots, though? I mean, to avoid that.
Yeah, but they don't have the safeguards on the paper ballots. I mean, if you really dive deep into the election fraud issue, what you find is that despite, there are these little glitches and stuff with the paper ballots, but the real problem is with the computers. And of course, all those companies are run by Republicans, and they're actually, they probably delivered the last election to Trump through computerized ballot fraud. So Trump is actually blowing smoke here to disguise the fact that he's the one who's most likely to steal the election, because his people own.
Well, both parties are kind of
okay. Well, and the other. Okay, go ahead.
Sorry, you're cutting in and out. I can't really hear you well. Both parties are pretty much guilty of fraud as often as possible. So, while the Republicans had the Diebold machines, I believe it was, but then there's another kind of machine that Los Angeles County, I know, just got a bunch of. That was a big kerfuffle during the primaries, back when we still had primaries, and that was like a Democrat linked situation. Some Venezuelan expats that were. It was a weird story, but there was all these reassurances that they weren't going to be allowed to do actual voting machines, and then whoops, then they have voting machines in Los Angeles County. So I mean, it's an equal opportunity fraud industry. Voting is.
Well, that doesn't actually surprise me that the Democrats are jumping into the game. Historically, it was a Republican game, but both parties being the two wings of the bankster crime syndicate, it doesn't surprise me too much. Well, the other issue here raised by my VT editors that isn't entirely wrong is that by putting out this inflammatory stuff about they're going to steal California from me, and it's the illegal aliens' fault. Trump might be setting the stage for Generalissimo Trump declaring himself presidente for life and canceling the elections. And now that he's sending the military to deliver vaccines and sending the military to quash the so-called insurrections that are not insurrections in the big cities, that possibility seems even more alarming, shall we say. Am I being paranoid here?
Well, again, it's like Trump had the option to declare full-on martial law across the country during the beginning of the coronavirus pandemic. He didn't do that. The governors did that. State governors did that. People like Cuomo and Newsom and Whitmer and these insane little wannabe Mussolini Democratic governors. So while Trump, I mean, it's possible that he could do that. I know that there are some of his fans that are suggesting he do that because they're unhinged. People like Mike Adams, who is a total nut job. They want him to say that no elections. But it's Cuomo who tried. Well, no, not Cuomo. It's the New York Democratic Party that tried to get rid of the primary completely. I think they ended up having to have it, but at a later date. I'm not exactly sure how that's going to work because there is no other candidate besides Sniffy Joe. But it's the governors that are trying to cancel the elections or move the elections. So again, this is like an equal opportunity thing. I still think that the Democrats want another 4 years of Trump because it frees them of the need to have to do anything. They get all the donations. They still get their wars. They still get their money to their donors. And the only thing that they have to deal with is the fact that he's aesthetically displeasing.
So it's a bipartisan conspiracy to give us Generalissimo Trump for at least another 4 years. That's a nightmarish scenario, but no scenario is too nightmarish to be conceivable these days.
Yeah.
So yeah, the latest breaking news here is that Trump has ordered the Pentagon to send the Army, military police units heading for Minneapolis on short notice. They're prepared and ready to go to fight the revolution. So this is getting pretty interesting. Soldiers from Fort Bragg, New York, have been ordered to be ready to deploy within 4 hours. Soldiers in Fort Carson, Colorado, Fort Riley in Kansas, they are all ready to deploy to go put down American quote unquote insurrection rioters within 24 hours. And of course, the definition of insurrection is an attempt to overthrow the government, which isn't happening. These are not attempts to overthrow the government. Unfortunately, I wish they were. so this is totally unconstitutional for Trump to be doing that. Another slight problem. But let's go on and name the real problem here, which isn't Donald Trump. It's the oligarchs. And the oligarchs are the people that we should be rioting against. We should be going after them, not just burning down small businesses, overturning cars. That is insane. We should go find the oligarchs and burn. Well, I shouldn't tell people to burn things and to overturn vehicles and things like that. Certainly don't overturn any Teslas. He's red pilled. He's a good guy. But anyway, no, the oligarchs, they've increased their net worth by $434 billion based on this pandemic. Bezos, Gates, Zuckerberg, Buffett, and Ellison have made almost 100 billion themselves, just that small group. I mean, this is the biggest transfer of wealth in history, counting that $6 trillion bankster bailout. And obviously the people that are stealing all that money must be the people behind the pandemic. I mean, that's kind of just elementary common sense. You don't even need your conspiracy theory details to figure that out.
Yeah, follow the money. It always that's one thing you can generally rely upon, especially when you've got somebody like Gates holding something like Event 201 and that predicts exactly what happens in the exact order that it is going to happen. And I mean, you have to be really deliberately obtuse to not look at this stuff, which is why they're trying to demonize anybody who tries to look at this stuff. But yeah, I still remember even a month ago, people were trying to tell me that, oh no, this economic collapse is hurting everybody. You can't possibly think that anybody would be benefiting from this, would you? I mean, that's so wrong. I mean, yeah, 434 billion worth of wrong. I mean, Bezos alone has just cashed in hugely, and it's not even done yet because something like 100,000 small businesses have gone bankrupt in New York alone. And the private equity firms that are going to snap those things up are going to be making money hand over fist. And that's going to repeat in every other state. Now that Cuomo has gotten some like small business help fund, now all those businesses are bankrupt. They can't really use the money because they're going to have to pay a restructuring expert like a Blackstone Group or whoever the other one is. He's got two big restructuring hedge fundy private equity guys on his economic reopening council. And those two are going to make a lot of money off everybody else's misfortune. That's what these guys are all about, making money off other people's misfortune. You can just tell by looking at Gates, like when you see an interview with Gates, and he can't help but like giggling and like squealing with delight when he talks about like suffering. He's like, side effects. There might be side effects. And he's like
he cackles with glee.
Yeah, he loves it. He loves it.
Yeah, they're right out of central casting. I mean, these oligarchs are villains out of central casting. Wake up, people. So anyway, you just wrote some great articles about this dystopian, Orwellian corona police state. You're calling it a paternalistic police state with masks as a religious fetish for the cult of corona. And I thought your analysis here, Helen, was just brilliant. So, I'll let you talk about it, but let me quickly say that the only thing here that I think, I would add to what you said or slightly, change the emphasis of what you said is you got it right that the cult of corona is a new religion. But I think what you missed is that it's a false religion. True religion's central function is to free you from fear of death, which means you no longer have to fear the powerful humans or anything else. That's what real religion does for people. They recognize the immortality of their souls. They recognize that their ultimate destiny depends on doing the right thing. They start doing the right thing, and they no longer fear anything, least of all the satanic-inspired humans who are trying to oppress them. That's what real religion is for. False religion, such as humanism, atheism, and COVIDism, does the opposite. It reinforces the fear of death to make you fear the powerful humans who could inflict death on you. So apart from that slight editorial addition to your article, I thought this was one of the very best things I've seen written on COVID.
Well, thank you. One of the things I mentioned is that the cult of coronavirus has taken aim at the church or all forms of existing religion with a special kind of animus that is not explicable by any logical reasoning. You can't there's no logical reason why you keep people out of churches when you have them going into like Walmarts or Costco's or anything where they're actually like on top of each other. Yet the idea of a drive-in church service, you had cops coming and breaking it up and issuing people tickets and trying to take them to jail. That doesn't make any sense unless you're dealing with a cult. But the point of the article is that basically there's all these rituals and this heretic shaming that have developed around this virus, which clearly it's about a hell of a lot more than a virus. The idea of wearing a mask at all times, for one thing, you can recognize your fellow cult member from a distance, and you can also recognize an infidel so that you don't have to like run the risk of associating with them. The mask is used as a talisman to keep away the virus, even though there's like most of the masks that people wear are not even of the kind that the CDC has now decided will keep away the virus. Now the CDC has changed its mind about 3 or 4 times about who should be wearing these masks, but the people listen religiously to every pronouncement that comes out of his mouth. So it's like the same idea as you're carrying around a clove of garlic in your pocket to keep away the vampires. And somebody asks you, well, that's kind of silly. Like, why would you be doing that? And you say, well, I haven't gotten bitten by any vampires now, have I? And so it's the same thing with the people wearing the mask or following the taped arrows on the ground at the grocery store in the aisles, as if walking the wrong way in a grocery aisle is going to make you sick. But sure enough, you say, well, I haven't gotten the virus now, have I? So something must be working. And I mean, it would be funny if it wasn't for the fact that people take this so deathly serious. There was an incident in Connecticut the other week where a guy was apparently not social distancing. So the woman takes off her mask and spits on him because he's walking too close to her, and not even walking too close to her, but walking the wrong way in one of these taped aisles. People are going completely insane. And there was that incident at the Staten Island, some supermarket, where they basically, a whole crowd of people who are wearing masks just started freaking out and going total invasion of the body snatchers on this 2 people who walked in without masks, and they didn't want to put the masks on. And so they literally started screeching and yelping. And when I first heard it, I thought there was like a bird in the video because somebody was making this sound like, "Arr, arr." And I was like, that's not human. They're not human anymore. And I mean, I don't like to say things like that, but there's really, I mean, people are going really crazy. The thing is that religion does provide whether it's a false religion or a true religion or whatever kind of religion it is, people cling to these things in times of uncertainty. And there's nothing wrong with that, as long as the religion doesn't involve like victimizing your fellow human for not agreeing with your increasingly bizarre cult doctrine. So it's unfortunate that it had to go that way. If all it was about ritualizing hand washing and things like that, you know, I wouldn't have a problem with it. I probably wouldn't even comment on it because, I mean, who am I to like throw shade on other people's coping mechanisms? But I have definitely a problem when it reaches heights like this and it becomes a situation where they're literally writing up. There was a guy. Not just one guy, actually. There's been dozens of these stories in establishment media where they take somebody who supposedly was they didn't believe in the virus, and then they say, well, then 2 weeks later they were in the hospital on a ventilator. Don't let this be you. And there's just like dozens of these stories, and every time you look into it, it's like revealed to be fake in some way. Like there was this morbidly obese guy who supposedly he didn't believe in coronavirus and he thought it was a hoax. And then he ended up in the hospital and so was his wife. And then like the more you read into it, then it's like he had some like heart problem that actually got him into the hospital. It wasn't coronavirus at all. And so it's just complete fraud. And yet they keep churning out these stories, or they'll say, oh, well, we tracked the protesters' phones back to where they went when they came home. And we know that by protesting, they spread the virus all over the country. And it's like, no, you don't know that actually, because like, you don't even know if they had the virus. You don't know. I mean, it's just a complete fraudulent narratives they're pulling out of nowhere. This is like the gospel of corona as written by 100 monkeys on psilocybin mushrooms or something. I don't even know. It's so weird. But it's real and it's a cult, and it's not that cultish. It's a cult. So that's about that.
And people are, you know, these wealthy oligarchs are profiting off the mass insanity. I mean, the next thing you know, they're going to put out a story that toilet paper protects you from coronavirus if you wrap it around your head and you look until you look like the mummy, right? And guess what? There'll be another run on toilet paper, and the toilet paper stocks will go through the roof. I mean, you can't put anything past these people, and you can't put anything past the crazy people on the street who are believing all of this stuff and going mad with fear. So how about the CDC going door to door? You did this interview with Spyro. About the door-to-door contact tracers coming to your neighborhood. Tell us about it.
Well, I took the contact tracing course because I was curious to see what we could expect as far as these snitches that they want to hire. They're going to pay these people $65,000 a year to snitch on you. So I wanted to know what exactly we were in for. And it's a very interesting little course. Of course, they've got some like non-threatening sounding women delivering the bad news, but they basically try to convince you that you personally, by ratting out your neighbor, can save you can significantly diminish the size of the pandemic just by ratting out one neighbor. And so they give you this savior complex, and then they list a series of legal terms like privacy, confidentiality, autonomy. But none of them apply when the contact tracing is involved. So they try to make contact tracing as this huge loophole through which you can violate all laws. You're supposed to, like, if you know that, say, your mother is going to go hang out with, get coffee with a friend, and the friend has coronavirus, but your mother doesn't know that, you can't tell your mother. So they're like trying to mess with people's loyalty to their family and friends and loved ones and things like that. Oh, your primary loyalty is to the government because they're the ones who have rescued you from dire poverty. Because, of course, when you put millions of people out of work and you dangle this little carrot of $65,000 a year job, which is, I mean, that's nothing to sneeze at, but you just have to betray everything you believe in and all the people that you love and, your own principles and things like that. But a lot of people are going to do it. And so I thought maybe it might be a good idea if people who are unemployed, newly unemployed, if they sign up and they do the job and they monkey wrench it and they call people up and say, hey, by the way, this is, there's a virus and you should be careful, but this is a government scam to take away your rights. So just be aware of that, pass it on. I mean, it could be
now that would be a great $65,000 a year job.
Yeah, I think that people should do it, and so
monkey wrenching the contact tracing. Well, that's right. I mean, they're
interesting.
Yeah, they're telling you join the American Stasi, and if enough patriots join the Stasi to undermine the Stasi, maybe it won't be much of a Stasi. And so, I mean, this pandemic, for whatever you think about how dangerous the virus is, and I actually don't think that's a total fraud. I think it is kind of a nasty super flu. But it's causing so much havoc. It's going to starve possibly hundreds of millions around the world. Nobody seems to care about that. And it's driving huge numbers of people to suicide, apparently. In Walnut Creek, California, Dr. Mike de Boisblanc, who's the lead trauma surgeon, says that he got a year's worth of suicide attempts in the last 4 weeks. So, again, the cure here seems to be worse than the disease.
Yep, and they knew that going into this. I mean, it recently came out that this whole lockdown, social distancing thing came from some 16-year-old girl's science project back in 2006. And that even at the time, all these health experts were like, this is a really terrible idea. You're going to drive people nuts and you're going to kill the economy and you're going to do this, this, and this. And so they had all these warnings. They knew it was going to do this devastating number on people's minds and people's lives. And yet they did it anyway. So it's like, I would like to see these people prosecuted. I'm sure that the people who have lost loved ones to suicide or the people who have lost their livelihoods and or who knows what else, the people who are about to lose their houses, I'm sure that these people would like to see the people responsible for these policies prosecuted because there was no reason for this. They knew going into this. Even the World Economic Forum was saying, like, within 2 weeks after the lockdown had started, they published something saying, this is the world's largest psychological experiment. It's going to end really badly for everyone. Yay! They get to sell more psychotropic drugs because prescriptions for like anti-anxiety drugs, antidepressants have gone up like 80%, I read. I mean, they're making a lot of money.
Depression is anger turned inward. And so maybe turning some of that anger outward and joining some of these protests and turning them against the oligarchs, not against the small businesses, might be a way to regain your mental health. So let's go through the coronavirus masks and vaccines section quickly here. First, the masks. We've got the death toll. The official death toll passes 100,000 according to Johns Hopkins University. And so how could we stop this? Well, wear these these fetishes, these masks, except Gemma says it actually isn't really going to work. However, some people would tell you that since there are these N95 masks that can stop the COVID virus, at least from being breathed in, it may still get into your eyes, but at least it'll help your chances. So there's that debate about masks. And Helen, I take it you're on the side saying that the mask fetish is simply part of the mass hysteria.
Well, it's just that nobody is wearing these N95s. The vast majority of people are wearing either like homemade ones or like those little flimsy surgical ones, and then there are some people wearing N95s, but like you said, it can still get in your eyes. They're finding that that's a very common route of transmission. And there's also the hazards of having your oxygen restricted. I mean, I was wearing a respirator when I went to the Barclays Center yesterday. And by the time that I took that thing off, I was having trouble like getting air, because it's just like, if you have one that works correctly, it's hard to breathe in. And that's, so you're trading one problem for another. And there are enough of these cases of people that try to jog with these things on and end up like passing out or having health problems. It's definitely a trade-off. And I think that when you have even the World Health Organization saying that like there's no logical reason for a healthy person to wear a mask, I'm sorry if the CDC has changed its mind like 4 times. The WHO has changed its mind a ton of times, but the only way that masks benefit people is if you have the virus and you don't want to pass it on to somebody else. Yeah, wear a mask. Great. And maybe they also recommend if you're a healthcare worker and you work with people who are likely to be sick, then yeah, wear one. Great. But for the average person, it just doesn't seem rational.
So if a mask is not a magical totem to make you safe, how about a vaccine? The polls are telling us that, well, 20% in this poll say they absolutely wouldn't take the vaccine, 50% say they would, and a third of the people are undecided. That's a pretty close parallel to a lot of 9/11 polls that find that about 20% are hardcore truthers. Maybe 50% more or less will go along with the official story. We can get that way down if you ask the question right, and then maybe a third are kind of in between, and that's pretty interesting. Another poll story here, this is the RT one, pointing out that you ask the question a little differently, and you get over a third of people being apprehensive about the vaccine, saying this is rushed development, and we don't trust the people behind it. Well, duh, come on. There's never been a successful corona vaccine, and many of these other viruses, they just can't do a vaccine no matter how hard they try, and then claiming they're going to get this out instantly. There's something really wrong with that story. But Helen, there's the Pentagon has just given $1 billion to this Oxford-linked outfit to produce hundreds of millions of vaccines that they're already in testing, and they're supposed to be ready for delivery by September. And according to John Hankey on my radio show last night, he looks at Trump, and Trump, an extreme germphobe, is running around wading into crowds, shaking hands, breathing on people, being breathed on. People in his immediate entourage are testing positive, and he doesn't have a care in the world. Obviously, he's already had the vaccine. Obviously, the military developed that vaccine along with the bioweapon before they launched the bioweapon, because as Daniel Estulin says, you don't launch a bioweapon until you've already developed the vaccine. So Trump went to Bethesda Naval Hospital in November, as we know, for mysterious purposes. He was vaccinated. He trusts the vaccine, and it's out there, and that's why it's going to be available soon, even though if this were a real natural pandemic, there couldn't possibly be a vaccine for at least several years.
And there isn't a vaccine because you can't make a vaccine for the coronavirus that actually works. Didn't you just finish saying that? I mean, the scientists who work on this stuff are expressing apprehension about this because, for one thing, it mutates too fast. You have to be constantly getting revaccinated, and I don't think Trump is doing that. He is taking hydroxychloroquine, which, I mean, I don't know.
Are you sure? I mean,
that's true. That's true. He might not be, but he says he is. I don't buy that he's been vaccinated, though, because I don't believe that there is a vaccine that works. For one thing, if they're giving Oxford $1 billion, Oxford just failed horribly its first trial results with these monkeys. They gave the vaccine to 6 rhesus monkeys, and all 6 of them got sick. All 6 of them were still contagious.
Not 12 monkeys? Only
they only
six
gave
monkeys
it to 6.
I
guess they didn't want to be too obvious. But I don't know, did you hear that story about the monkeys who broke out of the lab with the coronavirus samples and were like chewing on them on top of a tree? That's a real story.
Yeah, and
Yeah, hey,
defecating on the
just
heads
suck
of people
up.
in face masks below, probably. Um,
I'm sure. Yeah,
you can't make
they
this stuff up.
just they just keep pushing further and further, and nobody's calling them on their BS. It's like, dude, come on, can you just respect our intelligence a little bit? But yeah, as far as the vaccines go, the more people learn about this guy who's behind the Operation Warp Speed, Moncef Slaoui, the guy behind the failed 2009 swine flu vaccine, the more they decide that, hey, maybe I'll just be last in line for this one. And I mean, I hope that there's that option, because the people who are first are not going to be very happy after they get their shots.
Well, I don't want that vaccine, because either it will be a rushed vaccine that is certainly not proven to be effective and safe, or it will be a vaccine that was developed by DARPA and their friends many, many, many years ago and put on the shelf along with the virus itself to be used in biological warfare, and then it was taken off the shelf last fall and used. And that's why they're going to have a vaccine out in shorter than 2 years. Those are the only two possibilities. And either way, you don't want that vaccine. So, but still, Bill Gates will tell you that you do. And so who is Bill Gates? Let's go to the Corbett Report and meet Bill Gates. I thought this was a very good Corbett Report. Shout out to James Corbett, who's doing pretty decent work. So do you trust Bill Gates, Helen?
I trust him to depopulate the world very efficiently and with nobody uttering a peep about it, because he's paid them all off. I mean, he's a real scumbag. And he's a vindictive scumbag too. Like another person who I follow, Ryan at The Last American Vagabond, one of his journalists that writes on that site posted an installment of his Bill Gates expose, and the site has been down on and off for the last week after he posted that. So it's like, you'd think Bill Gates has got all the money in the world. He has better things to do than be chasing after all media personalities who pry into his eugenics activities, but I guess not. I mean, he did get me deplatformed off Medium. I assume somebody who was looking out for his best interests did. So he just has a lot of time on his hands, or has a lot of minions. I mean, the whole gibbering and squealing thing, it's like he's really just rubbing it in that he has all of this money and he can afford to get nobody to comment on. The economic suffering is so great. I mean, I'm doing a terrible impression, but you get the idea.
It's close enough,
bad.
really.
It's pretty bad.
Yeah, he's quite a character. The thing is, I don't think it's playing very well. I mean, there are a lot of people out there that really don't like this guy. So, people like, Michael Bloomberg throwing his hat in the presidential ring, imagining that people are going to like him, and his hundreds of billions of dollars in PR cannot make them like him. Likewise, Gates getting everybody deplatformed to criticize him isn't really helping his image. There's still a lot of people out there who really don't like Bill Gates, and they don't like other people who are profiting off this pandemic either. How about the Moderna executives who sold $29 million in stock right after putting out this completely bogus PR announcement that utterly mischaracterized their vaccine, making it sound like it was ready to go and it would work. And in fact, the tests were totally failed. And so these guys just cashed out and just sold their stock. I guess they're moving to Mexico.
Yeah, another pump and dump. I mean, nobody ever gets punished for this stuff, so why not keep doing it? It's just like the most shameless profiteering. I mean, and Moncef Slaoui, the Operation Warp Speed, was one of the guys who made $3 million off that one day of trading alone, and then they made him divest from it and give that $3 million to a cancer charity that's no doubt run by him or one of his associates, but. It's like the incestuous nature of the finances and the people in charge of all these initiatives is really, it's pretty disgusting if you're even giving it more than a cursory glance.
All right, well, let's move on to the war on China and war on cash categories. And they're linked this week. First, China has ruled out the animal market in Wuhan and the lab as coronavirus points of origin. That's not too surprising, and they're almost certainly right. So we'll see how the Western media deals with this, and whether the coronavirus media war turns into a hot shooting war, as Hong Kong and Taiwan and the South China Sea are all heating up. And Xi is not only trying to beat the U.S. by stopping the U.S. or the banksters who own the U.S. from destroying China's economy. But he's also trying to win the race for a vaccine. Well, good luck with that. I mean, if there's a race for an honest vaccine that hasn't been developed in advance as part of the bioweapon program, nobody's going to win it. Meanwhile, China is also retaliating for this attack on China and the global economy by putting out digital cash. Trials are already underway in several cities in China. This will be legal tender that doesn't have to go through a bank. It's an intermediary. So this and the Facebook money are really the two big competitors for this next generation of e-cash. And then France is doing the same thing in the next slide, as we see. So the world economic system is mutating almost as fast as the virus. And I think the virus may have been rolled out in cognizance of this crisis moment in, who's going to run the world, because, who's going to own the money.
Well, yeah, definitely. I mean, the economy was about to crash anyway, and they had to find a cover for that. And then when it crashes, they have to shunt that collapsed bits into the new system that they can then control. And since they have been putting the scaffolding for this in place for a year, then more than a year, but somebody's making noises. They've been putting the scaffolding for this in place for at least a year, probably more than that, but at least a year publicly. And so it's all falling into place, basically. And I'm surprised that this is not getting more play as far as like what the U.S. has had in store. The Fed has been working on one of these CBDCs for quite a long time, but you never hear about it. So I don't know what stage they're at with that, but I remember during the CARES, the original coronavirus bailout, they were talking about a digital dollar, and then that suddenly just disappeared. That was never heard from again. So I don't know where they are with that, or whether it's been slipped into one of the other bailout bills, but it's coming to our shores soon enough. And then whoops, no more privacy for your financial transactions. But since we've had the whole Bitcoin psyop, then everybody thinks blockchain is good. Blockchain is for privacy rebels, and not really, no.
So basically, it's the mark of the beast coming for us. And there may still be time to rebel. And speaking of rebellion, now we finally get to what's really the biggest story of the day, as we mentioned earlier. The Minneapolis can't breathe. Atlanta can't breathe. American cities can't breathe. We can't breathe because we're being ordered to wear these totem masks. And we can't step out of our stuffy houses. That's why we can't breathe. But if we get on our computers and look at what's going on in the world, we see cops like kneeling on people's throats and murdering them in cold blood. And now we're ready to break out. And a lot of people all over the country are breaking out. And there's going to be another huge protest today, this afternoon in Minneapolis. Trump is sending the military, or preparing to send the military, in gross violation of posse comitatus to Minneapolis, once again violating the Constitution. What Constitution, you ask? That's a good question. And so this escalating protest in Minneapolis and then around the country is pretty interesting. There may be some false flag aspects to it. Maybe the bad guys want full martial law, and maybe some undercover COINTELPRO types are doing some of the violence or inciting and setting off the violence, as happens so often at demonstrations. Alan Zabrowski tells us he strongly disagrees with that, but I at this point, I think there's quite a lot of COINTELPRO style false flag activity out there. It wouldn't surprise me if there's somebody out there who wants to incite violence and to, accelerate the chaos. What do you think, Helen?
Well, the problem that they faced was, that the ruling class faced, is that initially after the death of this man, George Floyd, everybody was against this police brutality. Even the Trump supporters, who usually support cops in these situations, a lot of the Trump supporters were like, they saw the video, they saw this guy kneeling on this man's neck for like 7 minutes while he's pleading for his life, while bystanders are also pleading for his life. There's really no way to spin that as, oh, the cop had his reasons. No, there really was no way. The guy was handcuffed, his hands were behind his back. There was no reason to do that. So everybody was united across races, across political lines. Ruling class doesn't like that, so they had to make it all a race war again, and that was tough, because it was supposed to just be a race war by itself, and then whoops, they forgot to, I guess, put some of the pieces in place, or they made it too obvious, and so they had to turn it into, instead of just having the people versus the cops, that would have been a huge thing of solidarity for everybody who's just spent 3 months in lockdown, being stripped of their rights methodically, and then to have them come out strong and go against the cops, that would have been a really powerful
even the cops were ready to join that and go against the bad cops. I mean, 98% of the cops who were speaking out were all taking the side of the protesters.
Yeah. And so they had to get people like this provocateur here with the umbrella there. And I'm sorry, Alan Swarovski, but that was not one of the protesters. You could see from where he was and from where the other protesters were, they had no idea who this person was. He was not involved with them. And that was the first building to get vandalized. So while it's possible to say that there were other people doing that at the same time that weren't involved with this guy, maybe were also part of the protest, the cops did completely overreact by shooting protesters full of rubber bullets and throwing tear gas at them when they were still peacefully protesting. And then the news just shifted to covering the looting and covering the vandalism when the protesters were encircling the police precinct, scaring the crap out of the cops. The cops had to build a huge wire fence around the precinct because they were afraid. They were pissing in their pants. And then finally, the news had to cover it when they seized the precinct and set it on fire. Whoops, we can't just cover looting at Target anymore because they actually got the right target. Lol. Okay, Target. Oops. But yeah, also, I was at the protest at Barclays Center in New York City last night, and there was a similar situation where you had peaceful protesters, a lot of them, and this was New York, so there were just cops everywhere. There was by the time I got there, the cops had already just broken the peace by randomly beating the crap out of a whole lot of protesters, arresting a bunch of people. For really, I asked, there were some legal aid people there, and I asked them what exactly excuse they had used to arrest them, and they said disorderly conduct, which is what they do when they want to arrest you for protesting, but they can't come up with a reason for arresting you for protesting, so they just say disorderly conduct, which just means, we didn't like your face. And so they had already dispersed the people once, and so there were fewer protesters there by the time I got there than there would have been. However, those protesters that left apparently went to 2 other precincts nearby and laid siege to those in their way. I mean, obviously, it's a lot harder to lay siege to a New York police precinct than with multiple small groups than it is with one big group in Minneapolis. But they set a police car on fire. There was no damage to the neighborhood. People in that neighborhood probably didn't even know they were there. I was driving home and I didn't see or hear anything. I smelled something burning, and it turned out that was the police car. And I was kind of upset because I would have liked to see that. It's a nice, cheerful image for those of us living in New York who have been on the wrong end of a cop many, many times. You like to see things like that. And it's the cops, nobody's forcing them to carry out the whims of the ruling class. They're basically being treated as whatever, I know there's a term for this, but whatever was the name of the police in the Warsaw Ghetto who would be in charge of carrying out the whims of the Nazis to oppress their fellow Jews. They're the equivalent of that. I know there's a word for it, but it's escaping my brain. So if they don't want to be that, they can abandon that post. And there are cops who have done that. That guy in Seattle who lost his job for speaking up against the unconstitutional lockdown regulations. So more cops need to do that. There's we will welcome you, and that's I don't know. I want to see more of what happened in New York and less of what ended up happening in Minneapolis, because this has the potential to be something really powerful if people keep it in the right direction and focus on who the enemy is.
Yeah, well, when the cops and the soldiers joined the revolution, it's pretty well won. And by the way, if you ever do see a suspected COINTELPRO agent, you're at a peaceful protest and then some very dubious individual starts, breaking a window or something, trying to incite violence or give the police an excuse to crack everybody's head, the best thing to do is unmask and photograph that suspected COINTELPRO agent immediately. Just rip the mask off and make sure people photograph that person, and you've just probably exposed somebody that you'll find is a police officer somewhere, or an FBI person or something like that. That's the best strategy for dealing with them. All right, well, we've covered some amazing news, and how about some even more amazing news? Israel is a kosher Nostra gangster state. Wait a minute, we already knew that, but Richard Silverstein wrote a good piece about that. Anyway, He points out that Israel's first national poet, Bialik, said the dream of Zion would be redeemed when there were Jewish thieves, prostitutes, and police, which tells you what kind of police he thinks they have, pretty much part of the same group. And David Ben-Gurion said pretty much the same thing, that when prostitutes and thieves speak Hebrew, Israel will have succeeded. I mean, so they basically are proud of the fact that they've created a criminal state. And a shout out to Richard Silverstein for being willing to say that.
Well, I mean, it was founded on terrorism. It was founded on genocide. So, this is not really a surprise. The entire state of Israel was founded on a genocidal act. It's, so that this is just more of the same.
Right. And Silverstein lists a bunch of these Israeli oligarchs who are actually, if anything, even more obnoxious than the American oligarchs. Of course, there are some dual citizen oligarchs who get to be obnoxious in both places. Benny Steinmetz is the blood. Well, no. He's the black cube guy. Then there's the blood diamonds guy, Lev Leviev, and who's being hidden by Vladimir Putin, by the way. Putin has an ambivalent relationship with the Russian mob. He's got some of them under control, but he works with others, and I guess that's what he has to do to be what he is and do what he's doing. But let's not pretend that he's a saint. And these criminal oligarchs control 60% of the capital in Israel. The issue of these, international dual citizen oligarchs who use Israel as the crime base, it's not just a huge problem in Russia, it's all here in the US.
Yep, definitely. And they can get away with whatever they like because like I said earlier, $38 billion over the next 10 years. And that's a low estimate. And that was passed in the middle of we've got 40 million people out of work, people who desperately need that money. No, that money goes to Israel. So it's clear who our elected officials are working for. And that these organized crime are just another layer of a very disgusting souffle.
And of course, Israel is famous for assassinating everybody it doesn't like at a vastly higher rate than any other country. And they may have claimed yet another victim this week, the alligator in the Moscow Zoo, Hitler's alligator. Did Bibi order the hit? That's right. Hitler's alligator has died at the age of what? Pretty old. I don't know, 70 or something, 80. No, more than that, 90 maybe.
80, it says 84 here.
84, okay, yeah. So he was liberated from the Berlin Zoo in 1943 when the zoo was destroyed in a bombing raid. He was crawling around eating people, apparently, in Berlin until the Russians found him when they invaded and put him in the Moscow Zoo. And now I guess the same guys that hunted down Eichmann in Argentina have finally managed to hunt down Hitler's alligator, so we can all be safe from that reptile Nazi. We may not be so safe from the reptile Zionists, and frankly, I think both groups of reptiles are pretty much two sides of the same coin.
I'm surprised they didn't try to put the poor alligator through a show trial like they're trying to do with these 94-year-old people that they're saying are concentration camp guards. It's like, yeah, you were a concentration camp guard when you're 17, and now you're 94. You need to go on trial. It's so it's grotesque. I mean, ew. I don't know. It's so slimy.
It is. At least they didn't accuse the alligator of eating the poor victims of Nazi atrocities and things like that. But speaking of eating victims of atrocities, we had a Soylent Green story to end with, and this is our final story today. Save the best for last. Trump's advisor, his economic advisor, Kevin Hassett, says that our country's capital stock is intact, so our human capital stock is ready to get back to work. I guess he's ready to send the sheeple and the cattle back to the Soylent Green factories and make some stock soup out of them. That's what the Twitter people are saying. Where do they come up with these people, Helen?
Well, I mean, it's a terminology that apparently has been in use for some time, but it's also a paradigm that's been in use for some time. If you that Michael Moore film that came out recently, and they're talking about how biomass, they're more and more making these fuels out of basically liquefied living creatures. Put an alligator in your tank. So some place was made fuel out of alligators. Again, just going back to the last story. But I mean, it's only one step from there to making fuel out of humans. So humans are a commodity, and the UN is using blockchain technology to track Syrian refugees. So that's another example of humans as a commodity, because this is the same technology they use to track pigs. This is the same technology they use to track I always forget what the other thing was, but it's another commodity like coconuts or something. And it's like a supply chain thing, and you get a biometric identity that's based on your iris scan. So when you think of this person talking about humans as some sort of product or some sort of like commodity that can be bought, sold, and traded, it's not that rare of a way of thinking about people. And as much as we'd like to believe our leaders do not conceive of us this way, we would be a little far off there. I mean, if we didn't have any use to them, then we would have been depopulated already. The only reason that a lot of us haven't been fallen victim to Bill Gates' chemical experiments is that they haven't fully perfected automation and AI yet.
Well, if you, dear False Flag Weekly News viewer, know any human capital stock that needs to be awakened, please do tell them about our show, because we are shadow banned, and so nobody's going to find out about us unless you spread the word. Well, thank you so much, Helen Byniski. It's great having you back on the show. Fantastic articles this week. Keep up the great work.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, and thank you to our viewers and supporters. Back next week, God willing. Have a great week.